Hi guys. Before we proceed to this video, we've got something very important to share with you. Neoliberalism, Inequality and Authoritarianism by Professor John V. Kofis is available for purchase. You can order it directly from the publisher Little French eBooks or through Amazon.
Hello everyone, welcome to a topic on popular and institutional opposition to authoritarian neoliberalism in the United States under Donald Trump in his second presidential term. The United States, without much doubt, now even not just by critics, but even by mainstream supporters of the status quo, tilting a little bit toward Trump, but having some doubts about some specific policies. Even they admit readily that the approach to government has been chaotic, disruptive, causing a great deal of harm to some groups, benefiting very few. And the most striking, most interesting aspect of all this is that there is an absence of political opposition, which would be the Democratic Party. Now, the question is, why is this, with the exception of 300 billionaires, American billionaires, who actually signed the petition and sent it to Congress requesting that Congress not approve Trump's 4.5 trillion in tax givebacks, mostly to the richest 5% of Americans who don't need it. With the exception of those, the approach of the Democratic Party and the approach of Wall Street has been to criticize specific policies, criticize personalities, whether it would be Trump, Musk, specific secretaries in cabinet positions, whether it would be the very controversial Secretary of Defense, whether it would be the Secretary of State, Commerce, Treasury, and so forth, or top advisors to the administration, but not the regime. And I do call it regime because this is actually a regime change. The fact is that the United States is not, under Donald Trump, a Republican, is not the United States of the Republican President Dwight Eisenhower of the 1950s. This is not the same thing. That was not a Republican Party that has anything to do, much resemblance to what we have today. The question of this, for us here, for me, is why is the Democratic Party, as the official opposition party, reluctant to adopt a much more grassroots approach, and in fact be very shy about such an approach, and initially asking its followers, its voters, not to engage in such grassroots protests, and in fact to accept the top-down approach, which would be through legal means and through the electoral process, both within the system. Now, Trump has defied the Constitution according to the Democrats themselves, even according to some Republicans who are reluctantly going along with the Trump administration. He has defied the judiciary, as we will see, both the Department of Justice as well as the Trump administration and Congress people, GOP individual House members as well as senators, have question the role of the judiciary in undermining the executive branch of government in its pursuit of executive orders, which of course invokes unitary executive theory, another way of saying violating the delicate balance of power within the constitutional framework. And that's what this is about. This is why I said this is not just another Republican administration like that of Dwight Eisenhower. This is regime tilting toward fundamental change, defying conventions. There is defiance of both domestic and foreign policy and its institutions. The Trump administration has used high pressure tactics to defy domestic institutions, to dismantle federal agencies, and to do so against the background of courts issuing judgments for the administration to stop what it's doing. The United States has defied United Nations and United Nations agencies, and it has defied national sovereignty of other nations, as the UN, of course, protects, has argued that all nations should respect rather, the national sovereignty of other nations, blatantly arguing the invasion, taking over, and not excluding a military solution for the invasion of Greenland, for example, calling Canada the 51st state and harassing Canada. And of course, today, with April 1st and tomorrow, April 2nd, launching an all-out universal tariff war. When Trump won, I did a video on Trump's China approach to foreign economic policy, namely a tariff war against China. And at that point, this is a couple of months ago, shortly after January 20th, 2021, when I stated that his approach is not to declare tariffs against China, but the world. Economic nationalism, in other words, is a global approach. And the question is, after doing all this, after violating the rights, not just of foreign nationals coming in through customs with a visa, but including U.S. citizens for decades, but foreign born, by the way, with a U.S. passport, and detaining them at the airport. And the question is, why, against all of this background, do we not have institutional opposition? And the answer, by the way, is that the institutional opposition is really there, but it's controlled, it's top down, and it's within the purview of the neoliberal system, because both the GOP and the Democratic Party support the neoliberal political economy. And it's called neoliberalism. Starts in the 1970s, imposed as an experiment by the United States on Chile under a dictatorship that the United States helped to install after overthrowing Salvador Allende, a duly elected president of Chile. And then, of course, Margaret Thatcher adopts neoliberalism in late 1970, 79. And once Reagan is elected in 1980, it's institutionalized in the United States, although the foundations of neoliberalism were laid during the Jimmy Carter administration in the late 70s. Now, neoliberalism, very shortly, I've explained this in many videos, is really about deregulation of the economy, which allows for greater concentration of capital among the richest, the most powerful corporations, to the detriment of not just the working class and the lower middle class, but even smaller companies that can't compete. It also means lower taxes for the rich and the corporations. It means corporate subsidies, corporate welfare, shifting resources from social welfare to corporate welfare. It also means adopting anti-labor policies. What Trump has been doing with the support of Elon Musk, who is out there dismantling and weakening federal agencies, is really pursuing classical neoliberal anti-labor policies. And yet, in spite of all of that, the Democratic Party has done very little, with the exception of the progressive wing headed now. He's obviously in our contemporary era, he was headed by Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont, but now, of course, he's joined forces, partly given his age, but he's joined forces with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman from New York. But with the exception of those few voices, then there are a few voices in both the House and the Senate of the progressive wing, the establishment, pro Wall Street, pro military industrial complex party, the party of Biden and Kamala Harris, who lost the election, by the way, because the American people did not see much difference, did not see much improvement. As Bernie Sanders pointed out, the working class was abandoned by the Democratic Party. And here we are under Donald Trump, tilting the government toward an authoritarian, oligarchic path, as the senator and many actually elected officials have pointed out, as well as critics on the outside. And yet we don't have much of an opposition. The opposition, it's interesting, the most vehement, the strongest opposition I have seen came when the Defense Department, led by a person who has zero experience in defense policy and defense affairs. He was a reporter for an anchor, actually, at the Fox News. They allowed a reporter to come in and to actually take part in a classified session that involved decisions that had to do with U.S. Striking a target and using, of course, an app that is classified. So that's the opportunity that the Democrats saw to attack the Republican Party and Trump, namely attack them from the right. You're not, the accusation was you're not guarding national secrets, which they're not, by the way. You're not, as you claim, as guarded as protective of the defense establishment and intelligence as you claim. The Democratic Party has also attacked the GOP because under Trump they have tilted toward Russia and against Ukraine. The argument is, of course, that the Trump administration strategy, which there's no evidence that it's anything but fantasy, will somehow use Russia as a counterweight to China, not taking into account that the Russia-China relationship is a very deep, far-reaching relationship in all sectors, from defense to obviously economic integration. But that is what the Democrats are doing. They basically, we're not pro-Ukrainian enough. they have attacked the Trump administration for not being pro-NATO enough. Again, supportive of the military-industrial complex, not being supportive of the traditional allies. So the attack against the Trump GOP government has not been what is the administration policies, what are the administration policies, and how are they impacting the broader middle class and working class, the American people. They don't approach it from that perspective. They don't approach it from how do policies impact the citizens of the United States, the majority of the citizens. Their approach is how do they impact the elites? And in this regard, they're not that different at all from the Trump administration. So the Trump administration is serving elite interests, namely those linked, by the way, the difference is those linked to the Trump administration, as we'll see, the cult of personality and personally to Trump, and who financed him. That's why we have Musk in the White House, because he gave 300 million to the Trump campaign, close to that. So we have basically a Democratic Party that whose goals in policy, in both economic policy at home that impacts the American people, as well as defense policy, is not that different from that of Trump. So this is why they are shy. They're very, in fact, not just shy, they're very concerned about a grassroots movement, because the grassroots movement they don't control. It's going to go it's going to be out of their hands, because the people are way ahead of the conservative Democratic Party, which is actually more conservative than the Dwight Eisenhower Republican Party of the 1950s. Today's Democratic Party is more conservative than Eisenhower was, a Republican, by the way, a Republican in the 1950s. So this is the situation we are in. Institutional support also comes from Wall Street. The fact is, Wall Street is behind both political parties. BlackRock, one of the largest corporations in the world, Goldman Sachs, are with both political parties. They have given money to both sides. The largest corporations in America give money to both sides. So they have them under their control. So these political parties are beholden to corporate interests. They serve corporate interests. So they don't have the Democrats as an institutional entity doesn't have legitimacy to go to the heart of what the Trump administration is doing, namely class warfare, because class warfare is what the Democrats have pursued. Now, the mass media has presented opposition from exactly the mass media, especially the liberal mass media, okay? Those who are against the Trump administration has presented political opposition to the Trump administration from the establishment middle class, from the establishment Democratic Party perspective, not from the progressive side, not from the popular opposition party. So they have actually selectively decided what to include when it comes to the popular opposition when it comes to opposition, I should say, both institutional and popular, to Trump. They include only what is within the established Democratic Party and exclude grassroots efforts. Now, they do include Bernie Sanders, AOC, and you can very well avoid those because they attract tens of thousands of people. They did when they were holding the the so-called oligarchy, the anti-oligarchy tour. They went around the country in several cities, and they attracted tens of thousands of people, indicative that there is a groundswell. There are a lot of people out there against what this administration is doing, both politically and in terms of economic and social policy, and in terms of violating the Constitution of the United States. So what we have here is that part. We also have another part, the opposition that is covered only in a certain way, without, in other words, namely the anti-Musk movement, because this is not only an anti-Trump. There's not only an anti-Trump movement in the political opposition of the United States, the popular grassroots movement. There's also an anti-Musk movement, which is now worldwide, by the way. It's global. And the reason is very simple. Musk himself, nobody forced him. He chose to inject himself into the politics of other countries. And Europeans made it very clear that they deeply resented that. Now, even yesterday, March 31st, when there was a decision came down that Marine Le Pen, the head of the neo-fascist political party, who was actually slated to become the next president of France, was found to be guilty for embezzling European funds, European Union funds, and could possibly wind up in prison. The Musk-Trump group, actually, the president himself, came out in support of this person, this neo-fascist individual in France. So this is one of the reasons why a French politician some time ago, in the early days of the Trump second, he's only been in office for a couple of months, said, France wants the Statue of Liberty back, because the French, of course, had given it in the late 19th century, because the United States doesn't represent democracy anymore. It doesn't represent liberal democracy, the principles for which the Statue of Liberty stands. Now, the anti-Musk movement in the United States that is selling cars, people selling their Teslas and divesting, getting out if they own Tesla stock, getting out of the Tesla stock, is actually another way of criticizing the Trump administration for appointing someone who was South African born, by the way, let's not forget that, openly has expressed his support for far right-wing politics globally, okay, not just in the US, so people know where he stands, and is in charge of doing what? Attacking the working class by dismantling the federal agencies, creating a clientelist state in the United States that is bringing in people. Eventually, they will bring in people linked to the GOP, so loyalists, third world style, what a government in Pakistan would do, or in Turkey, global South governments would do, patronage system politics, and dishing out with the savings, dishing out contracts to Silicon Valley to bring in artificial intelligence to replace humans. So this person has actually is also part of what the popular opposition sees as what is wrong with the Trump administration. An unelected, nobody elected Musk, individual who comes in and uses very high-handed tactics to dismantle federal agencies that serve all people, but especially, by the way, in case people think that federal agencies serve the poor, they don't. They actually serve the capitalist class. Very few agencies in the United States are for social services. The fact is that historically, from the progressive era, when that is from 1901, from Theodore Roosevelt to Wilson, we have the creation of the modern federal agencies based on a merit system, professionalizing these agencies to better serve a rationalist capitalist system, to inject more intersectoral competition, prevent one sector from dominating the economy and getting a largest slice of the pie at the expense of the rest of the economy. And having, of course, the ability for the country to compete with others, namely other modernized industrial countries. This is being undermined currently. One of the things that we see among the people, and this is why we have quite a bit of popular opposition, contrary to what the mainstream media, with the exception of independent news organizations like Democracy Now!, The Intercept, Jacob and the Nation, those entities, with the exception of those, by the way, Salon, The Onion, and so forth, you're not going to get much coverage of popular grassroots opposition. Yet, public opinion polls indicate between 50 and 65% of the American people right now, okay, believe that the United States is either authoritarian or becoming authoritarian. It's on its way to evolving towards such a course. This is the reason that Senators Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have been so popular when they go out to give speeches. People turn out. They're thirsty for a voice representing them, who believe that the country is tilting to the far right, as was the case in the interwar Western Europe, when certain countries moved to the far right, to the detriment, of course, of all of Europe. I want to point out that the United States government is has been on the warpath against the delicate balance of power, which is, of course, invoking unitary executive theory, which basically means that the executive branch, the White House, defies the other branches of government, the legislative and the judiciary, which was set up by the founding fathers to make sure that the United States does not lapse into a tyrannical form of government. And yet, on March 25th of 2025, the Department of Justice formally targeted big law firms that were going after those who were either Trump-linked individuals or groups, and they threatened them with all sorts of things, including eliminating their security clearance. On the same date, on March 25th, supporting the Department of Justice targeting of law firms going after Trump administration, individual entities within the Trump administration for violating the law, by the way. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, threatened judges issuing judgments blocking Trump administration executive orders, again, saying to the world, saying to America and the world, that the House GOP leadership endorses unitary executive theory, which is a form of authoritarianism under a thin veil of electoral politics. And how would Speaker Johnson punish judges? He would do what Ronald Reagan did. Ronald Reagan is the one who, of course, institutionalized neoliberalism. And in 1982, to punish judges, he simply eliminated the district, the federal district where the judge was presiding. So they have the power to do that. However, that is very clearly a high pressure tactic, a high handed tactic, and it is a violation of the delicate balance of power. If you don't respect the courts, you don't respect it. You have a breakdown of the rule of law as the United States proclaims that it respects. Both at home, it proclaims, but it does not, by the way. Here's a clear-cut case where they are going after all the entire judiciary branch, by the way, all the way up to the Supreme Court. They're threatening the judiciary branch. They're threatening law firms engaged in lawsuits targeting Trump administration linked individuals and groups. So what we have here is a concerted effort to undermine the delicate balance of power, as I said. Now, some Democrats have spoken both in the Senate and in the House against some of the worst abuses inspired by Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tours, where they saw the Democrats, the establishment Democrats, did see with their own eyes for themselves that tens of thousands of people across America were coming out to support the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And especially after Chuck Schumer, the minority leader of the Senate, Democrat, obviously, and 8 others, or 9, I think it was 9 altogether, Democrats voted for the continuing resolution to support Trump's agenda when it came to the budget. This was a turning point for some Democrats to argue, okay, enough is enough. And some have come out and argued that, what Trump is saying and what he's doing, what the Trump administration is saying, what they're doing is actually 2 different things. That they support certain capitalist interests that are linked to the GOP and actually punish others. In other words, it's not a blanket support of capitalism. Okay? It is targeted support of capitalists. It's not, I don't want to use this analogy. I hate to use this analogy. It's not like Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, who had actually made deals with the capitalist class, both of them, by the way. And there was support of the capitalist class. And the capitalist class remained silent when it came to, they wouldn't criticize those regimes. In this case, Trump is saying to them, you either support me or I'll punish you. And he's adopting the same approach, by the way, with states, especially democratic states, and states that have tried to divide him. And so a number of state governors who are Democrats have banded together and tried to protect themselves and their states against punishment from the federal government in Washington. Universities, the same thing. He's punishing universities by withholding funds. Okay. All of this, the establishment Democrats in the Senate and the House, they see this, and they have finally gone a little bit closer to the Bernie tactics, to the Bernie progressive wing. Some of them have exposed, for example, the hypocrisy in the Trump administration, America First, and the tariff policies, which are supposed to bring in between 3 and 6 trillion. By the way, believe me, I have done the research on this from this Eisenhower administration to 2020. The receipts from imports, tariff imports to the US budget are 2%. The entire budget of the US is under 7 trillion. The idea that 3 to 6 trillion is going to come in is preposterous from tariffs. The idea that tariff receipts are going to replace income taxes is preposterous. There's no economy. And one of my undergraduates when I was in higher education, if I had said that to one of my classes, any one of my a little bit brighter undergraduates would have picked up on it and immediately questioned me. This is not serious rhetoric. This is rhetoric. I don't know who actually believes any of this. In any case, some of the Democrats establishment Democrats have had enough, and they have begun to dig a little deeper. And what they have discovered is actually Trump, with his economic nationalism rhetoric and his authoritarian style approach, pro-oligarchic approach, as Bernie Sanders stated, has actually been violating his own rhetoric. For example, it was revealed in Senate committee hearings, that the Trump administration is actually giving incentives, subsidies, corporate subsidies, to companies to cheat the IRS, allowing for them to declare profits made at home as profits coming in from outside the United States, so they don't pay taxes in the United States. This is especially with the pharmaceutical industry, by the way, a very profitable industry. Considering that the United States spends the most money in the world per capita for prescription drugs, okay? Considering that it has the costliest healthcare system, not the best, by the way, in terms of serving everyone in the country, 350 million people, far from it, no universal healthcare, costliest, but not the best in serving the public, the American citizen. So now we have finally some establishment Democrats coming out and saying, by the way, there is hypocrisy here. It is a myth that this man, Trump, and his administration is all about economic nationalism, considering he's allowing these corporations, American corporations, to declare profits made inside the United States as coming from outside. So there are companies that may make 70% profits in the US, 30% outside the US, but they declare part or all of it, a large part or all of that is made outside, so they don't pay taxes. So tax evasion is rampant. And there's a bill right now, 4.5 trillion, most of it going to corporations and the richest Americans. This is why 300 billionaires signed a petition saying, don't do it. Don't go along with this. They know that it's short-term profit. Obviously, a windfall. They know that it's to their benefit. As Warren Buffett pointed out during the 2017 $2 trillion tax break to the richest individuals and corporations. He said, I got the money, but I didn't need it. He wasn't in favor of it. He didn't think it was the right thing for the longer term health of the American economy. Now, the establishment Democrats have at least done that. Against that background, there is a 50-50 plus one, 50 protests, 50 states, one movement, grassroots organization across the United States, let alone locally and statewide, all across the United States, that does not get much support. These people eventually, the grassroots movements, by the way, historically take time to to consolidate and to have much of an impact. And the United States is now experiencing the rise of a grassroots movement against what a number of scholars, and I agree with them entirely, called the Trump Bonapartist, named after Napoleon III, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, a Bonapartist style leader. Napoleon III emerged out of the chaos of the revolution, the French Revolution of 1848. All of Europe, with the exception of England, by the way, had revolutions in 1848. All of Europe. And out of that comes the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, Napoleon III. Eventually he becomes Emperor Napoleon III, I should say. And he presents himself as someone above politics, someone catering to the national interest, destined to bring back the glory of his uncle, Napoleon. Although Napoleon Bonaparte was a disaster, was defeated, by the way, by the Europeans. And of course, France went back to the traditional monarchy and had another revolution in 1830 and another revolution in 1848, and then another revolution in 1870, and finally became a republic. But the fact is that he, out of the chaos of and the turmoil for meaningful social change during the Industrial Revolution in the late 1840s, the year that Marx and Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto, 1848, Napoleon emerges. Napoleon, he would become Napoleon, the Emperor Napoleon III, emerges, presenting himself as a national savior, someone who is only interested in populist, of course, rhetoric, right and left, presenting himself as the savior of France. Trump is doing the same thing. The interesting thing is that Trump is deviating from previous presidents of serving capitalism as a whole, and he specifically serves individual corporate interests and individuals like Musk within the capitalist system. And some scholars, very few scholars, I should say, you really have to search the internet to find their articles, have picked up on that. They picked up on the fact that this man has deviated from support of capitalism overall. Now, it is true, by the way, that governments under the capitalist system in the last 500 years pick and choose what capitalist interests to support. At one point, it was the railroads in America, for example. It could be shipping interests. It could be, right now, it's Silicon Valley. So they do pick and choose that what they decide. And of course, those benefit to the detriment of others. It could be banking, for example. It could be any one of the sectors. It could be the mining sector. It could be rare earth minerals, which are very precious for high tech, as well as the defense sector. So, something that Trump is obsessed about. That's why he wants to confiscate Greenland and violate its sovereignty. But this is true, that it's not just Trump in this case. But Trump has systematically adopted a policy of favoring certain capitalist interests, punishing others. And this is a nuance that we haven't seen. And the other thing that he has done, which this is the reason that scholars call him Bonapartist style leader, and I agree with that, by the way, is that he has been fomenting division within the capitalist class so that he rises above it, exactly as Emperor Napoleon III did, by the way. So when he does that, then they all rush to, either out of fear, or I should say both out of fear and to derive benefits for their companies and for themselves. So we see this sort of climate. For example, Barron's, Goldman Sachs, a number of Goldman Sachs, by the way, just recently downgraded the S&P 500 twice in the 2 months that Trump has been in office. This is Goldman Sachs. This is the heart of capitalist America, by the way, Goldman Sachs. But they don't have confidence in this person. They don't have confidence in this administration, which they support, by the way. They support because they see the benefits, and yet they downgrade the stock market. Okay? They argue that it's going to be much lower than they previously assumed, even just a few weeks ago when they downgraded it for the first time. So, and by the way, the IMF entirely agrees the US would be lucky to reach 2% GDP growth this year in 2025 versus China's 5%. Okay. Now, so we have this sort of situation. And against this background, the question remains, where is the political opposition? What is a voter supposed to do when the last 4 years before Trump, there was Biden, who was embraced by, and he embraced himself, the neoconservative militarists launching a proxy war in Ukraine, supporting Israel's genocide war in Gaza, according to the International Criminal Court, by the way, not according to me, according to the United Nations, according to all sorts of organizations and governments all over the world. This is consensus. This is the reality. And even elements within the United States agree with that. Even elected officials within the United States agree with that. So we had Biden, who by embracing a military solution to diplomatic crisis, destabilized the US economy and the world economy, okay, going along with aspects of economic nationalism against China, no different than what Trump had done in the first administration and is now doing to the world, as we'll see tomorrow. Tomorrow is April 2nd. So what is the voter supposed to, where is the political opposition in the United States? The United States only has a two-party system. It's not Europe. It's not Germany and France that have many political parties. They have no place to go except those two parties. Okay? Independents have failed in the US historically. They don't go anywhere. So there is really no political opposition. This is the tragedy. The tragedy in American society is that liberal democracy, as established by the founding fathers, and a delicate balance of power in government, legislative, judiciary, executive, is threatened, and yet no political opposition. The people are thirsting for a solution, for a political solution, but they're not finding it because Bernie Sanders, who, by the way, is a New Deal Democrat, a lot of people call him all sorts of names, socialist and so forth, communist and all of that. The fact is that Bernie Sanders is a Keynesian. John Maynard Keynes is the one who advised FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to adopt the New Deal. Okay, the New Deal, the perimeters of the New Deal economics are based on John Maynard Keynes, who was not a Marxist. His style of economics, his political economy, his political theory was intended to save capitalism, not to destroy it. Okay? If anything, the New Deal saved capitalism, contrary to the nonsense and vacuous rhetoric by the far right and even some Democrats. So if Bernie Sanders, Keynesian economics, New Deal politics is not acceptable, he's the progressive, and Ocasio-Cortez, of course, is now along with him, and a few others are very meekly following, very shyly, very, very shy about it, following, scared of what would happen to them. They would lose funding from corporate America to run again. That is at the issue, that corporate money, big billionaire, millionaire, multimillionaire money finances American elections. So they know that it's not some short order cook or some factory worker that finances the election of American politicians. It's corporate America. They own both political parties. So there is no political opposition. This, again, I emphasize, this is the tragedy. And the media, by the way, the media is molding the American people, because just as the Democrats, the establishment Democrats, are afraid of democracy, so is the liberal, so-called liberal, anti-Trump media. They're afraid of democracy. They're afraid of grassroots movement. They're afraid of the people. They're afraid of popular sovereignty. So they don't encourage popular sovereignty. This is why we have authoritarianism in the style of Trump. This is not to say, by the way, that Donald Trump's government was not elected. Of course, he was elected. So this is not a government that has come to power through a military coup d'etat. Not at all. Elections, like Napoleon III, right? Elected. This is not Francisco Franco or Antonio Salazar, okay, the Spanish and Portuguese dictators, respectively, in the interwar period in the 1930s. This is a government that was elected. However, the policies are nevertheless authoritarian. They are not related to liberal democracy by anyone's standard, by anyone's standard. So the question is, what is the future of American democracy here? Not very good, because the US is, right now at least, we don't know what the future holds. The US is under a two-party system, which some scholars call a uniparty. Now, that is, they don't differ on much except culture wars. Identity politics for one side is different than identity politics for the other, based on far right-wing ideology and cultural tilt of the far right, obviously, of the Republicans, who are the far right party, and the Democrats, who have actually become the new Republican Party. As I said earlier, the fact is that this Democratic Party, establishment Democratic Party, is more conservative than Eisenhower's Republican Party in the 1950s. So we have no alternative here. This is why so many, and a number of scholars and popular analysts readily admit, including the senator from Vermont, that the reason so many stayed home, a few went to Trump, and did not elect Kamala Harris to succeed Biden, which would have been a continuation of Biden policies. The reason is because they didn't see the point. There is no substantive difference in these two political parties, except that one is openly flirting with fascism, and the other is using identity politics not to embrace social justice. And that's the problem. We don't have a political party in America that is openly embracing social justice, not identity politics, which is camouflaging the neoliberal goals that the establishment Democrats want to accomplish, with identity politics, which is a very superficial way of dismissing social justice and continuing class warfare. No different, by the way, than the Republicans. So political opposition right now is nowhere to be seen. Not with the exception, like I said, with the exception of Bernie Sanders, with the exception of a grassroots movement that is not getting mainstream media coverage. With the exception of that, there's not much there. So, where is the hope? Actually, the hope is in the contradictions of the neoliberal political economy and in the policies that the Trump administration, as well as the Democrats who stealthily go along with, by the way, many of them. We saw Chuck Schumer side with the GOP on the continuing resolution a couple of weeks ago. We see contradictions within the neoliberal system. In other words, the policy of the Trump administration of fomenting divisions in society, whether it's culture wars, going after migrants, minorities, women, or fomenting divisions within the capitalist class. That has a limited time span. That's not going to work forever. That will backfire, as will the tariffs and the chaotic policies of imposing tariffs, then withdrawing them, then reimposing them. What kind of way is that to run a government? That rational human beings can, other than a few people shorting the market, then going long on the market, shorting the market, going long, and making short-term profits in the interim, if they're lucky. That's no way to run a government. Instability as a way of life is no way. Chaos as a way of life is no way to run a government. So for now, this is what we have. The best hope is that the system implodes. In other words, that this neoliberal system, which is in crisis, by the way, it has been, obviously, the Great Recession of 2008 proved that. The Great Recession exposed the myth that neoliberalism works. It doesn't work. It needed the state to come in and pour trillions of dollars into the private sector to save it. Without that, and without China's intervention of helping the United States buying the paper that is treasury bonds, we would have had a huge economic contraction. So the contradictions of capitalism under the neoliberal political economy model are actually the best hope to extricate society from what Bernie Sanders calls the oligarchic authoritarian route. I thank you for listening. I ask you to write comments and to join this channel. It's an educational channel. That's its only goal. And it is managed by my very good friend, Asad Ali. Thank you very much. And we will shortly have another session on a different topic. Thank you.